C'est un temps court,
and it was short to start with. With every passing day, we move closer to the date for departure of the UK from the EU. Just to remind you, the 29th of March 2019, upon the stroke of midnight. The fundamental question to which we must find an answer is this. Upon that day, the 29th of March 2019, midnight, upon that day, will we have organised a proper orderly withdrawal for the UK? Or will the UK be exiting the EU without agreement? Without agreement with the EU, with all the consequences that we have already explained. For our part, in the common interest, beyond even just the EU and the UK's interest, in the interest of the European continent, we believe that the best way is with agreement. Over the course of this week, ladies and gentlemen, we have made a number of clarifications, useful clarifications, on a number of points, many points. For instance, there's the status of border workers, the aggregation or totalization of social security rights, dealing with pending cases and procedures in the Court of Justice, just to cite a few amongst many. However, we did not get any decisive progress on any of the principal subjects, even though, I want to say, even though on the discussion we've had about Ireland, that discussion was fruitful. This is a topic which I personally follow very closely. I follow all of them. But I would like to say that on that subject we have made genuine progress. On the question of the common travel area, on the basis of guarantees from the United Kingdom. And we've also been able to clarify, Sabine and Ollie, we have clarified work that still needs to be done in a constructive spirit, in particular on North-South cooperation in the framework of the Good Friday Agreement. So that's been something. However, as I've said before, time is pressing if we want to get what we want, which is a global agreement. At the current state of progress, we're quite far from being able to say that sufficient progress has taken place. Sufficient for me to be able to recommend to the European Council that it engage in discussions on the future relationship between the UK and the EU at the same time as we would during the course of 2018 go on working on finalising the exit and withdrawal agreement. So that's what I'm taking on our side from this third round. Now, since I'm here before you today, I'd also like to take this opportunity to underscore 3 points that are part of the general backdrop to the negotiation. These 3 points need to be well understood, perhaps better understood in some cases than they currently seem to be. First of all, this negotiation is an unusual one, to say the least. It is unprecedented. It's particularly true for us in the European Commission. We're working with all the expertise of our people and services, and I thank them for that expertise, under the full authority of President Juncker, and we're working on the basis of a mandate. This mandate was fixed to us from the outset, from day one, by the 27 heads of state and government, meeting as they were in European Council under the presidency of Donald Tusk. Naturally, we also work very closely with the European Parliament, under the aegis of President Antonio Tajani. The European Parliament very early took a very strong stand with a very large majority in its resolution. Please don't underestimate the role of European Parliament. That's one point I want to make. Now, this mandate, which was unanimously approved by the 27 heads of state and government, this mandate is what I am scrupulously taking forward. It is very clear and precise. It sets out a sequencing. It asks us to do things in the correct order to succeed. It clearly mentions conditions for a transition period if the UK should so request. It asks us to organise the orderly withdrawal in a way which takes into account a future relation, or what I called a new partnership. Those who seek to find the least difference between what this European negotiation team is doing and that which was tasked by the member states, those people are wasting their time if they seek one iota of difference.
Stipulated precisely in the guidelines of the European Council, protecting the EU legal order and protecting the integrity of the single market are core principles of my mandate. The UK decided to leave the European Union. The UK government decided to leave the single market and the customs union. We respect this sovereign decision. One thing is clear. The single market, the EU capacity to regulate, to supervise, to enforce our laws must not and will not be undermined by Brexit. The UK strongly contributed to the development of our single market, which is the foundation of the EU. It understands well, very well, how it works. The European Council guidelines state that the Union will preserve its autonomy of decision-making. The UK wants to take back control, wants to adopt its own standards and regulations, well, but it also wants to have these standards recognized automatically in the EU. That is what UK papers ask for. This is simply impossible. You cannot be outside the single market and shape its legal order. Thirdly, the first phase of this negotiation is about creating trust. Let me take two examples where we still need to build trust. On citizens' rights, we have clarified a few points this week, usually, but we need to go further to reassure citizens. Over the summer, around 100 EU and EEA citizens living lawfully in the UK received deportation letters. The UK government quickly recognized that it was a mistake. But this is not the first time that something like this has happened. It reinforces the need to ensure that citizens' rights are directly enforceable in front of national jurisdictions under the control of the European Court of Justice, a point on which we disagree today. On the financial settlement, EU taxpayers should not pay at 27 for the obligations undertaken at 28. It would not be fair. In July, the UK recognized that it has obligations beyond the Brexit date. But this week, the UK explained that these obligations will be limited to their last payment to the EU budget before departure. Yet we have joint obligations towards third countries. For example, we have guaranteed long-term loans to Ukraine Together, we jointly support development in Africa, Caribbean and Pacific countries through the European Development Fund. After this week, it is clear that the UK does not feel legally obliged to honour its obligations after departure. We have also jointly committed to support innovative enterprises and green infrastructure in European regions until 2020. These are not recognised by the UK as legal obligations. Which shuts uncertainty, how can we build trust and start discussing a future relationship? We need to address together these issues seriously and rigorously. Mesdames et Messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, I never thought that this negotiation would be easy. I always knew, I've always said, including before you, even from day one, last November, I've always said that this would be complex and that Brexit will have many consequences. Social consequences, human consequences, technical ones, financial ones, economic, legal. Now, over the last 3 days I've seen, again, that there is a lot of commitment on both sides in both our delegations, and I want to stress that. And that really strengthens our determination and our spirit on behalf of the 27 to go forward with the hope of getting an agreement. That's the spirit. Time is flying. It's passing very quickly. If we need to, we on our side, on behalf of the 27, are prepared on behalf of the EU institutions to step up and intensify the rhythm of those negotiations. That's all I have to say. Thank you. I'll give the floor to David now.
Thank you, Michel. And can I start by adding my compliments to both teams to yours. They've worked incredibly hard this week. It's been, as ever with an important negotiation, quite a high-stress week in terms of their work. So they deserve our compliments and our thanks. Now, this week we've had long and detailed discussions across multiple areas, and I think it's fair to say we've seen some concrete progress. I mean, Michel referred to one, but there's more than that. However, as I said at the start of the week, it's only through flexibility and imagination that will achieve a deal that works truly for both sides. In some areas, we have found this from the Commission side, which I welcome, but there remains some way to go. Talks this week have once again focused on citizens' rights, on financial matters, on Northern Ireland and Ireland, and on issues relating to our separation. And I'm pleased to say we've engaged in detail on all of those areas. Now, when I met Michel here on Monday to open this third round of negotiations, I set out the need for us to drive forward the technical discussions. I want us to establish the areas where we agree and work through the areas where we disagree to ensure that we make further progress on a whole range of issues, and I think we've delivered that. The UK's approach has been informed by a series of detailed papers on customs, on Northern Ireland, on goods, on civil judicial cooperation, on data, on enforcement and dispute resolution, and on technical matters regarding our separation, such as ongoing confidentiality obligations. These papers represent hard work and detailed thinking that has been going on behind the scenes across Whitehall over the past 12 months. They offer pragmatic and innovative solutions to issues related to our withdrawal and the future deep and special partnership that we want with the European Union. They do not aim to dictate a single approach, but rather considered options for us to work on. As I said all along, issues around our withdrawal and our future relationship are inextricably linked. Our approach of setting out positions on them both is designed to progress the current negotiations as swiftly as possible. And I note what Michel has just said on that. I'll come back to that in a moment. And that approach is already bearing fruit. But beyond the debates around process and technicalities, at the heart of this process must be a desire to deliver the best outcome for the people and the businesses of the European Union and the United Kingdom. And the most obvious area for that is on citizens' rights, which remain a top priority. This week we've discussed a wide range of issues which will have a significant impact on people's lives. In particular, both sides have agreed to protect the rights of frontier workers, to cover future social security contributions, so those covered by the withdrawal agreement, that we should at least protect existing healthcare rights in arrangements with the EU 27 citizens of the UK and UK nationals in the EU, the EHIC arrangements. That's good news, for example, for British pensioners in the EU. It means they'll continue to have their healthcare arrangements protected, both where they live and when they travel to another member state, to be able to use an EHIC card. On economic rights, to secure the right of British citizens to, in the EU 27 to set up and manage a business within their member state of residence, and of course vice versa. On mutual recognition of qualifications, we've made progress on protecting the recognition of qualifications for British citizens resident in the EU 27 and EU 27 citizens in the UK. For every one of these, of course, in fact every single thing I've said, all of these are reciprocal. They work for Brits in the UK and in the EU and EU 27 in the UK. To that end, we will shortly be publishing a comparison of the UK-EU positions. And we've had further discussions on the governance of citizens' rights agreements and the wider withdrawal agreement. We've shown a willingness to discuss creative solutions in this area, and now is the time for the Commission to match that. On the financial settlement, the central point, I think, of Michel's comments, the Commission has set out its position, and we have a duty to our taxpayers to interrogate it rigorously. At this round, we presented our legal analysis on on-budget issues, on off-budget issues, and on the EIB, the European Investment Bank. It's fair to say across the piece we have a very different legal stance. But as we said in the Article 50 letter, the settlement should be in accordance with law and in the spirit of the UK's continuing partnership with the EU. And I'll repeat that phrase, in accordance with law and in the spirit of the UK's continuing partnership with the EU. Now, Michel and I agreed in the last round, it's clear we won't be making incremental progress on a final shape of deal on this in every round, and I think this round demonstrates that. I think we've succeeded in building mutual understanding, but it's also clear that there are still significant differences to be bridged. On Ireland and Northern Ireland, Michel gave credit to this, our coordinators have met again to build on discussions in July. We've had a good discussion on maintaining the common travel area and on safeguarding the Good Friday Agreement on the basis of the UK paper. We think there's a high degree of convergence on these key issues, and we agreed to work up shared principles in the common travel area. We also agreed to carry out further joint technical work on cross-border cooperation under the Good Friday Agreement. On separation issues, we've had good discussions on the detail of papers the UK published ahead of the round. We've reached almost complete agreement on our approach to post-exit privileges and immunities, which benefits both the UK and the EU to maintain after we leave, and on our mutual approach to confidentiality requirements on shared information post-exit. On Euratom and other institutional issues, we've built upon discussions in July and are well placed to make even more progress in the next round. We remain committed to making as much progress as possible on these issues that are solely related to our withdrawal, but our discussions this week have exposed yet again that the UK's approach is substantially more flexible and pragmatic than that of the EU, as it avoids unnecessary disruption for businesses and consumers. We propose pragmatic solutions to prevent this disruption, and we urge the EU to be more imaginative and flexible in their approach to withdrawal on this point. However, I remain of the view that on this, as in many areas, there's an unavoidable overlap between withdrawal and the future, and they cannot be neatly compartmentalised. To conclude, the third round of talks have been productive and are an important stepping stone and key building block for discussions to come. We're peeling away the layers one by one, working through many issues at speed and moving towards the core of these important matters. We've locked in points of agreement, unpicked areas of divergence. Being dynamic is integral to driving forward these talks at pace and to providing the best outcomes for people and businesses, not just in the UK but in the EU as well. And Michel referred to the issue of time, the 29th of March 2019, midnight. I've said from the beginning of this process, some parts of this will be turbulent, hard, difficult, and of course we will see that because there are differences of view which have to be resolved. But both sides, and this was very apparent this week, both teams aim to be constructive, aim to get an outcome which is in the benefit of both the European Union and the United Kingdom. That's the aim of both teams. So my message to Michel in response to his comments and his team as we turn our heads to the next round of talks is let's continue to work together constructively to put people above process. As discussions in June, July and again this week have shown, our separation from the European Union and our future relationship is inextricably linked. We can only resolve some of these issues with an eye on how the new partnership between us will work in the future. This is not about skipping ahead or trying to reopen previous discussions. It's about pragmatically driving the process we all want to see. To that end, my team will publish further papers in the coming weeks, continue to set out our ambition for these negotiations and the new deep and special partnership the UK wants to build with the EU. I look forward to the next round of talks. Thank you.
Thank you. We can now switch to your questions. Let's start here from the right.
Thank you. James Mace from ITV News. Mr Davis, it's clear that the EU side is demanding more clarity. The Prime Minister says the British are providing that clarity. You say your stance is one of constructive ambiguity. Which is it? And Mr Barnier, if I may ask you, you seem frustrated, almost angry at the way these talks have gone this week. Do you think there is any chance of sufficient progress having been made by October?
Welcome again.
Like father, like son. The constructive ambiguity actually is not a phrase of mine. I think it comes from Kissinger, actually, but there we are. Look, we have been very clear in all of this from the beginning. The Prime Minister made the Lancaster House speech, the most thorough speech on this subject ever made, I suspect. There was the 2 white papers. There's the Article 50 letter, an extensive and detailed letter about where we're going. And I think almost a dozen, I think it's 11 papers to date on what we are seeking to do, our perspective of this. And as I said, the papers don't always say this is one route to go. Sometimes there's 1, 2, 3 options that have been used in the past. Indeed, that sometimes gets us into trouble when we're as open as that. So the aim, the Prime Minister's right. Our aims and our intentions are crystal clear. Our ask is crystal clear. How we get there isn't always certain, but that's what the point of this negotiation is, to deliver a good outcome for both Britain and Europe.
While David was answering his question, I was wondering how you saw that I was angry and frustrated. I think I have shown a typical calm of a mountaineer, a calm I try to maintain. And I haven't been or wanted to show that I'm frustrated. I have shown perhaps that I'm impatient. I've never shown any anger. I have tried to show determination. And if I do get angry someday, it will be very obvious, I assure you. But it's not the case. Now, I am both impatient and determined. And that is why what I would recommend, if we want to succeed, is to be as constructive as possible and as unambiguous as possible.
David there at the center. Can you wave so that... Yeah. Okay.
David Hudson with Politico. Thank you. For Mr. Barnier, you've often talked over these months about the benefits of membership in the EU. And I wonder if you can point to anything you've seen in the paperwork, the discussions that you've had with the UK that shows the British side acknowledging and conceding that it is giving up those benefits rather than trying to keep all those benefits going forward into a new partnership. And for Mr. Davis, you've now talked to us twice this week about the need for flexibility. Are you seeing, after 3 rounds of talks, sufficient flexibility to your mind from the EU side, or do you think the EU 27 have tied the hands of your colleagues too tightly, perhaps?
C'est une question.
That is a very good question, and you put it very cogently. The United Kingdom, once again, has decided to withdraw from the European Union. The British government has officially informed us that they will be leaving the single market and leaving the customs union, the customs union, which is an intrinsic part of the single market. We have taken due note, and in line with the remit I was given, we are pursuing these negotiations, and I would always encourage you, when in doubt, to have a close look at the guidelines on all the issues if you want to know what my working method is, because I am meticulously following the guidelines. As I've said on a number of occasions, there are a lot of consequences for citizens, for consumers, for businesses. Perhaps not all have been debated in sufficient depth in the United Kingdom, but now is the time to explain what being a member of the European Union and the single market entails, and what no longer being a member of the European Union and the single market also entail in turn. And I would hope that there will be such a debate on an objective basis. We would be happy to take part. When I read some of the papers that David has sent me on behalf of the British government, in some proposals I see a sort of nostalgia. In the form of specific requests which would amount to continuing to enjoy the benefits of the single market and EU membership without actually being part of it. Now, maybe I've got the wrong end of the stick. Maybe there is no nostalgia. But as I said earlier, Brexit means Brexit. Leaving the single market means leaving the single market. If that is what has been decided, there will be consequences. And as far as we are concerned, in particular, in terms of the integrity of the single market, the respecting the four freedoms and the absolute respect for the EU's decision-making autonomy when it comes to the single market. That has to be said, because it's simply the truth. And once again, it's not we are leaving, it's the United Kingdom has decided to leave the EU.
Yes, thank you. I wouldn't confuse a belief in the free market for nostalgia. The question of the flexibility. There is a structural arrangement in the European Union. Michel referred to it, which gives him a mandate, and that, of course, creates circumstances within which he can negotiate. But the phrase I've used, flexible and imaginative solutions, was a direct quote from the Council, the European Council, and I think they're right.
Okay, let's move on. Yes, please, gentleman here on the right from the sun. Yes.
Matt Dathan from The Sun. David Davis, you've refused to publish any details on the divorce bill, and instead you've just ripped apart the EU's legal arguments. Do you concede that this approach is holding talks back? And to both of you, you both admitted the deadlock this week. Would you be prepared, both of you, to come back to Brussels more often, maybe next week, every week, until you break that deadlock? And David Davis, it surely can't be helpful having a former Prime Minister, Tony Blair, here hugging and kissing Jean-Claude Juncker at the same time as your press conference?
Well, I'm not going to comment on the movements of private citizens and what they do. In terms of the approach, the European Union made a claim on the United Kingdom, on the United Kingdom taxpayer, for a large sum of money, unspecified but undoubtedly large, and on the basis of what it determined to be our legal obligations. And so the proper approach to that is to go through line by line and see whether or not we believe those legal obligations are correctly codified. Now, bear in mind what we have said, what the Prime Minister has said a number of times, starting in the Lancaster House speech before this process started, and repeated in the Article 50 letter, and repeated time and again after that. We will meet, we're a country which meets our international obligations and will continue to do so. But those obligations have got to be well specified and they've got to be real. They don't necessarily have to be legal. We also recognise moral obligations sometimes. But I think on this context, this was the right way to do it. It will, of course, lead to difficult exchanges. Nobody will pretend it was anything but a tough exchange this week. But I think the British taxpayer would expect nothing less, and your readers certainly.
If I may, and if I can say something on that very point, and it's part of the stuff that's tied up with the timetabling and all that, delays and whatnot. I said early on in the introduction that time was short, and there is a risk. We have to use the time we have properly and do things in their due order. And I've always said this here in front of you or whenever I spoke publicly. And the first thing one has to do is to agree on the principles of the big topics underpinning this withdrawal that the UK has decided upon. And we have agreed what these big topics or subjects are. Citizens' rights, Ireland, and the financial settlement. To settle the accounts. In order to make discussions simpler, we've set out a very precise list of commitments and accounts that have to be resolved, that the 28 subscribe to and the 27 will not agree to having to pay on their own based on the current financial perspectives. And we have a list of all the legal bases underpinning each of those commitments. I'm asked to show flexibility. But you need to start with a clear position based, for instance, on what the UK recognises as their commitments, legal and moral, as David has used the moral term as well. So, ladies and gentlemen, there are thousands upon thousands of individuals and businesses, students, universities, laboratories, local government bodies, not to mention third countries. I mean, we're talking about the EDF as well, the European Development Fund. These all have projects and programs that are ongoing, they've committed to, other taxpayers are involved. And they've all done this on the basis of something that was told to them by the EU 28 starting in 2014. I was Commissioner on Structural Funds, the Regional Policy Commissioner, for a while. So I know what it means for dozens of regions across the EU where they have a 7-year perspective of rolling payments, sometimes that only arrive after the 7-year period is over, and who've built projects on that basis. So that's why I know what's at stake. That's what I'm talking about. I know there have been difficulties, and we've talked about that, but we've talked about a lack of progress. That's all I can say, that there has been a lack of progress. But beyond that, there is a strong commitment. The UK has made commitment to find a way forward. We need to find a solution to do that. Flexibility, yes. But hang on, what was it you actually said? I've forgotten the second word. Oh, yes, imagination.
It's a council question.
Oh, yeah, I know. Sorry. Well, everything is possible. And I mean, when it comes to presentation, the spread of payments or whatever, but we have to find a solution, because I have to go back to the 27 with a clear answer. That's my mandate. I have to reassure them first before we can go forward.
A question for Mr. Barnier and for Mr. Davis. In view of your analysis of the outstanding issues and the financial issues in particular, Mr. Davis's intention to discuss these line by line, and as regards for Mr. Barnier, his methodology, which was not to do calculations but set put in place a methodology to start with. What do you think the chances are of reaching a result before or in time for the October Council? And if no such result is forthcoming, will everything be held over until December?
La qualité.
On behalf of the 27, what we can say is that the quality of agreement we achieve on these three issues, and a high quality, sincere agreement, is reaching that is more important than the time frame. We will have shortly after this a technical briefing if you want more details. David has spoken about a line-by-line approach. We're for that too. Of course, there are other aspects too that come into play, but we have prepared the ground for this line-by-line, commitment by commitment, legal obligation by legal obligation. We're ready for that, and that's what we want, with a view to reaching agreement.
I agree. Quality of agreement matters more than time.
This concludes our press conference. Thank you all for your presence. Technical briefing follows.